want an egg to hatch, you got to build a nest. Now, that might sound random or sound like a. If you want an egg to hatch, you got to build a nest. Now, that might sound like a random way to start this video, but there's a reason why I'm starting it out with this phrase. The first thing I want to say is when it comes to being furious about the Cleveland Browns, that time has passed, right? Like the ranting about the Browns and screaming and doing all that stuff about the 2024 Browns, that time has passed. They stink. It's obvious the role that bad quarterback play has played in the Browns 2024 season, and that role has been catastrophic to their win-loss record. We can be reactionary. We can yell about accountability and insist that the only way to hold somebody accountable is to fire them. That's not what I'm on. The Browns are 3-11. And because I love this team and because I want them to be better, I don't want to focus on repeating the same reactionary cycle that we saw the Browns do from 1999 to 2018, which is anytime that you had a really disappointing season, you would fire the head coach, you would fire the GM, you get a new head coach, you get a new GM, they have a disappointing season, you fire them, and then you continue the cycle, and then you wonder why it's been 20 years and you've developed like 3 first-round draft picks. Part of it is because, if not most of it is because, of the constant cycling of general manager and coach. Like, if you've ever wondered, hey, why aren't the Texans as snake-bit as the Cleveland Browns? And then we'll probably blame it on the fact that the Browns are on cursed land or something like that, and say that's why the Browns have been bad. But it's not the curse or anything like that. It's been because the Texans haven't fired their coaches as much as the Browns have. Like, the Texans have been more stable than the Browns, which means they developed more talent than the Browns, which means that talent was able to play better than the Browns' talent because they weren't consistently switching out the coaches, switching out the GMs, picking the players, and then switching out the coaches who are evaluating the players, and then making those players who are drafted to do one thing do something else. They weren't constantly doing that. And because they weren't constantly doing that, the players they had developed, they had some good seasons. They went to some conference championship games. I even believe they almost went to a Super Bowl. They went to a Super Bowl way back in the day, and we're still sitting here blaming expansion for every problem that the Cleveland Browns have had, not understanding that the reason that the Browns are like this is because every time we have a bad season, we just fire the coach and GM and repeat the cycle all over again. I'm not saying Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski are the greatest head coach and GM combo to have ever lived, and they should be immune from fire. What I am saying is that they're good enough. And good enough is fine when it comes to head coach and GM. Because, like, whenever you're firing the head coach and GM because of whatever happened in the season, the hope is that if you just hire the right head coach and GM, well, then none of the problems that existed the year that you had to fire the head coach and GM are ever going to pop up again. But that's not going to happen. You're not going to hire a magical GM that fixes every problem with the Cleveland Browns. You're not going to hire a magical head coach that fixes every problem with the Cleveland Browns. You got to do the work. And when you're constantly firing the people who are doing the work, you are doing the opposite of doing the work. You're just resetting the work every couple of years, and you end up in the same cycle. Like, if you want the Browns to be different from what they were from 1999 to 2018, which I think every Browns fan who actually loves the Browns would want to be the case, then you have to stop thinking that doing the same stuff that this team did from 1999 to 2018 is the answer every time there's disappointment. Can't continue to do this. Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have mixed bodies of work. But at the end of the day, I find these two, and I think the players in the building find these two to be functional and worth developing further. Like, they're not finished products yet. And yes, have they made bad calls in the past? Yeah, absolutely. They've made some bad calls in the past. But I think that these two are talented enough that letting them learn from their mistakes will be more beneficial to this team going forward than firing and hiring another GM head coach combo. Maybe I'm wrong on that, But I just want this team to have some semblance of stability. So developing the players that you draft actually stands a chance. Because again, you got to build a nest if you want the egg to hatch. And the Browns need to get a quarterback. Now, there's different levels to getting a quarterback, right? Not every time that you need a quarterback do you need that quarterback to be a franchise guy. The Browns are in a situation where right now they need somebody who could just be pedestrian at quarterback for a couple of years, right? They don't need Joe Namath, the writer in here. They don't need the greatest quarterback of all time. They need somebody who could be pedestrian. Because if the Browns had a pedestrian quarterback, they'd be at least in playoff competition right now. Yes, the Browns have flaws. I'm not trying to act like they're a perfect team outside the quarterback position. I'm not trying to act like they don't have flaws outside the quarterback position. Their left tackle situation has been horrendous. Their run game has not been great. They have lackluster depth at linebacker. They could use better safety play. But guess what? Last year, when you didn't have horrendous quarterback play, you had all those problems and you won 11 games. This year, you have all those same problems, but now you don't have pedestrian quarterback play. And now you stink. It's only these problems that we talk about the Browns having right now, the smaller issues that people want to focus on outside the quarterback position. They're only fatal when your quarterback is ass, right? Last year, Deshaun Watson wasn't terrible when he played. And then Joe Flacco came in. He wasn't terrible. And that was enough to get the Browns to 11 wins. When the Browns this year have not had awful quarterback play, they've been able to compete against good teams. But when they have terrible quarterback play, they can't compete against anybody. If the Browns want to keep their job, right, if Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry want to keep their job, they have to win games. You cannot have multiple 3-win seasons to your name and keep your job. I understand the reality of that. So if they want to keep their jobs, if they want to have a chance at developing these first-round picks, they're going to draft this offseason. They want to have a chance to build a nest that potentially can hatch a franchise quarterback in the future. Well, you got to get somebody at the position sooner than later who can just be pedestrian at the very worst. Is that a possibility this year? Is that a possibility next year? Right? We're used to asking the question in the draft, is this guy a franchise quarterback? And if you're looking for a franchise quarterback in 2025 or even in 2026, you're going to be disappointed. But hey, man, are there any game managers in this class? We don't love looking for game managers, right? And I'm not suggesting you do something crazy like draft somebody you believe to be a game manager in the first round. But if you think there's a game manager in this draft class and you think that it's worth it in the third round, then go take that dude in the third round. Like, is there a game manager in this draft class? Is there a game manager in free agency? Is Sam Darnold, like, he might not be a free agent franchise quarterback. He might not be the next Geno Smith or something like that. But can he be a game manager? Can he be somebody who performs adequately at the position so you can win a decent amount of games over the next few years and build a nest to potentially draft a franchise quarterback in 2027? Is that guy there? That's what I think the Browns need to focus on. The reality about drafting a quarterback and developing a quarterback in the NFL is it doesn't happen by random, right? You can point out that Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick. You can point out that Brock Purdy was a 7th-round pick. You can point out that Dak Prescott was a 4th-round pick, or that Green Bay has incredible fortune because they go from franchise quarterback to franchise quarterback to franchise quarterback. But look at every single one of those situations. Tom Brady got drafted to a really good Patriots team that already had a nest built because they were playing around Drew Bledsoe. Brock Purdy got drafted to a really good San Francisco 49ers team that was built around, and sustained and nested up with Jimmy Garoppolo. And then that got him to Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy was put in that nest and he hatched. And it was great. 7th-round pick. Awesome, right? Dak Prescott was in the nest that that they built around Tony Romo. And then he hatched. Green Bay had nests on top of the nest, and they got franchise quarterback. See, the thing that people don't want to acknowledge, that there are things you could do organizationally that make your odds of hitting on a quarterback much higher than just simply getting the highest pick possible, right? A lot of times we look at the quarterbacks or getting a franchise quarterback like getting rich in the lottery, right? Where it's not up to anything that you do. It's just pure luck in chaos. That's not the truth. Finding a franchise quarterback has a lot to do about the nest that you build for a potential quarterback in the future. If you can get Trevor Lawrence, who was seen as this unbeatable, unstoppable, top five-star prospect coming out of Clemson, but you could be the Jacksonville Jaguars. You don't have a nest built around them. And now people are telling me constantly that Trevor Lawrence is worse than Jameis Winston. I heard that take more than once last week. And like we had already seen Jameis throw 3 picks 2 times by that point. My point is, you can fall into the best prospect of all time. And if you don't have a nest built around that quarterback, it's not going to matter as much as you think. You can't close your eyes and hope somebody saves you from your quarterback problem. If you want to save you have to save yourself from your quarterback problem. You have to build a nest around the position. You have to build around a quarterback who might not be the guy until you're sure that you landed the guy. And the one thing we've learned over the last few years is that you can't rush the franchise quarterback stuff, right? 3 teams have tried it. 3 teams have had it blown up in their face over the last few years. Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson, Cleveland Browns, Deshaun Watson. You can't force a franchise quarterback. As much as it's appealing and enticing to do, you can't force it, right? What you can get is a quarterback who could get you by in free agency or in a trade. But you're never going to get that franchise quarterback in that situation. It's happened 3 times, and literally all 3 of the guys it's ever worked out for are all-time greats in Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and Peyton Manning. Other than that, it's not worked. So unless you're going to get an all-time great in free agency and the draft, thinking that you're going to jumpstart this thing by getting a franchise quarterback in free agency or something like that, it's not going to happen, right? You can't take a shortcut to this. Got to take the long route. In order for Pat Mahomes to happen, the Kansas City Chiefs needed Alex Smith, because what Alex Smith allowed them to do was stabilize the position and stabilize the franchise so they can have an organization built around Pat Mahomes by the time he arrived in 2017. So they can develop him properly. So they can put Pat Mahomes in a nest and he can hatch properly. Can't force it. Can't force it. Can't force a guy to come out his shell early. Can't force not having a nest around a quarterback and thinking it's going to work. Look at Caleb Williams right now. He's one of my favorite prospects of all time. And he's struggling mightily with the Chicago Bears. And the way you build a nest is with stability at coach, is with stability at general manager. You want to make sure that by the time you get your franchise quarterback, you have an organization that's comfortable knowing what players work in their system, what players don't, what quarterbacks work in their system, what quarterbacks don't. One of the conversations Kevin Stefanski definitely needs to have with Andrew Berry this offseason is a conversation about what flaws of a quarterback is he willing to deal with. Because I think not knowing the answer to that question or not being sure about the answer to that question is kind of the key reason why the Browns are in this situation to begin with. You got to decide as a coach, if you're going to invest in somebody as your starting quarterback, is that guy's flaws I'm willing to live or die with? Pat Mahomes works with Andy Reid because Andy Reid don't care if Pat Mahomes throws a crazy interception or 2. He's not freaking out about that. He's fine with it. He wants Pat Mahomes to take that risk. But maybe that's not the kind of coach Kevin is. Maybe Kevin needs somebody who's going to be a little bit more risk averse. That means he's willing to sacrifice that player's ability to be explosive downfield. And that can work too, right? It's not that one style works better than the other, that gunslingers are better than game managers, that, mobile quarterbacks are better than not mobile quarterbacks. Is that, hey, are you willing to accept the inherent flaws that come with this player's play style, right? If you draft a mobile quarterback and that quarterback consistently decides to break the pocket and run for 5-6 yards instead of throwing the ball downfield and hitting the check down, is that going to bother you? Because if that's going to bother you, then maybe you don't need that quarterback whose skill set is that. What skill set are you comfortable with? What skill set are you comfortable with their flaws being what you die on, right? If you get Kirk Cousins, You got to accept that he's going to throw a check down on 3rd and 13. And you got to be okay with that. You got to be absolutely okay with that, right? If that's the dude that you want to go with, or that's the skill set that you want to go with. That's what the Browns have to decide. What do they need for their system? And what do they don't mind if there's a flaw with the quarterback that comes into it, right? Dillon Gabriel is somebody who I think can be a game manager in the NFL. Like if he's put in the right situation, I think the Browns could be the right situation for him. But the thing is with Dillon Gabriel, limited skill set. He's left-handed. Are you willing to deal with that? You know, he doesn't really throw the ball downfield a ton. Not going to have the craziest arm strength. Not going to have the craziest physical presence. He's small, real small, 5'10" small. Is that something you're willing to deal with? Are those flaws you're willing to deal with? Drew Aller, right? If you draft Drew Aller and he comes out this year, there's going to be flaws that he has. Are you okay with those flaws? He might throw a couple interceptions because he's trying something with his arm. Are you okay with that? Because if you're not okay with that and you're the Cleveland Browns, you don't need to draft them. They got to figure out what they want at the quarterback position and what they're okay with. Because they went with Baker Mayfield, and Baker Mayfield was too reckless for them, right? They wanted a quarterback who would take care of the football a little bit more, right? So they got Deshaun Watson, and they told Deshaun Watson, take care of the football. And Deshaun Watson played a ultra-conservative style football, and they could not live with that either. So they got to figure out what style of quarterback are they comfortable with? What flaws a quarterback has are they comfortable with? And live with that and make decisions within that. Can't live in the past, obviously, but you got to learn from those mistakes. This offseason is going to be critical for the Cleveland Browns because how they move on from the Deshaun Watson era and how well they dig themselves out of this hole will define what they're going to be for the next few years, and maybe even longer than that. So they got to be sure about what it is they envision at the quarterback position. If they want to sign Sam Darnold and they think Sam Darnold can be decent for a couple of years, they got to be okay with the flaws that Sam Darnold has, right? That he's going to take some shots downfield that might be ill-advised at times. They got to be okay with that. Every quarterback's going to have a flaw. You got to be willing to live with it, right? Jalen Hurts can move and run well, but he's not the most accurate throw of the football all the time. You got to be willing to live with that. I think so often we focus so much on a quarterback's flaws and say that guy stinks because he has this flaw and act like that's not part of the game. That's part of the game. Everybody has pros and cons. Even the greatest of all time had pros and cons. The Browns got to figure out what pros they can live with and what cons they can't. Because so far, it doesn't feel like they know. And I think this season should give them a good idea of what they want to live with and what they don't. Because right now, they need to get them a quarterback that can give them time to build a nest if they really want to get a franchise guy. That's where the Browns are. And look, if you get somebody who can hold it down and be pedestrian, this Browns team's going to make the playoffs a couple of years in a row. We're going to be happy and having fun doing it. And then they'll get somebody to play quarterback, and that guy might be put in the right nest and hatch. And next thing we know, we're talking about the 2024 season as a distant memory. But they got to handle this offseason correctly. They got to know what they're looking for at quarterback. And they got to know what they're building that nest around. That's my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have you a better night. Peace.